Welcome, everyone, to the Wired for Wonder podcast. My name is Lori Kirkland, and we are excited today to have Alejandro Rivas-Micoud join us. Alejandro, do you want to do just a quick introduction for the audience?
Absolutely. Thank you, Lori, and delighted to be here. Uh, I am a US citizen, but I've lived in various places around the world, Japan, Europe, US, all over. And nuclear engineer, an MBA from INSEAD in France. And I've been a founder and co-founder of a bunch of different startups. Some had great outcomes, some were learning experiences. Currently running Userlytics, a user experience testing platform.
Awesome. And we're so glad to have you here. And just as a reminder, right, Wired for Wonder is, we're a podcast where we want to dive deep into the minds of innovators, trailblazers, right, people and leaders who are thinking about the future of work and how we can help ourselves and help other humans, right, create a future of work that's amazing for humans. As we get started, Alejandro, I'd love to just hear from you if you can think of since you have such a nice, vast, different background. I wonder if you can share with us some experience that you think was probably one of the best learning experiences that you've had, and what type of what did you learn about yourself when you went through that experience?
Sure. Um, there's been a few out there, but I'll just choose one, which is I was running a company, a telecommunications operator, and this was at the uh, during the dot-com bust, and we had been valued by one of the leading global investment banks at you're worth $1.7 billion, blah 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 blah. And then the bust started, and all of a sudden, our valuation started going down and this and that. Long story short, our parent company went bankrupt 1 year later.
Hmm.
And so we were faced with a company that had a lot of debt, a lot of cash burn. The market was in a recession, so nobody was coming to the rescue, so to speak. And we had 450 employees. And so in that scenario, sorry, that's my dog barking in the background. I apologize. Uh, in that scenario, um, I remember looking at my employees in the eye and telling them the facts. This is where we are. The probability that we'll survive this is very low. But having said that, we're at rock bottom. So everything from here on out is upside. And I really felt that. I actually felt kind of relief because until then, things were always going down. But then, you hit bottom, you can only go up. So, and that's what happened. In fact, 3 years later, we sold the company. It was restructured, this and that, and it became part of a larger telecom group. But we saved a bunch of the employees' livelihoods. We saved the client. We had like 130,000 clients who were relying on us for services. And yeah, that was a really interesting experience.
All right, that's incredible and such a tough experience to be in. But as you were talking, I loved the way you said I was honest, right? I was just honest and said things the way that they were, because that's can be, missing in the corporate workplace sometimes. Everybody wants, ideally, we all want everything to look perfect, but the truth is
Right,
we run into barriers every day, all day, right? So being
right.
able to just communicate that is incredible. When you think about that experience, and then you also think about the fact that, like the dot-com bust, we are in a very changing world right now. AI is bringing new changes globally. We're seeing, right? We're seeing just a lot of changes where kind of humanity is very divided in some ways, but it just feels like we're on the precipice of a big change. And in the workplace, AI is accelerating that change and making it, giving us this great opportunity to look at what do we want to build if we're going to be building whole new systems, right? How do we want to use it? When you think about your experience and you think about the changes AI are bringing, what bits of advice might you give to other leaders around self leadership? Like, what types of skills do you think might be really valuable for people to stay adaptive in a changing world?
Yeah. Well, in terms of leadership, I remember a leadership course I took with a very well known uh, psychoanalyst, but who analyzes corporations. And and he told me his mission in life was to help the leaders that he was training to understand that when they got up in the morning, if they said the wrong thing, if they did the wrong thing, they could ruin the day for 10,000 people.
Mm,
And I love that way of thinking about it. That as leaders, sometimes we forget that what we do and what we say and how we say it and how we do it affects people's day in profound ways, because we don't see ourselves as being a father or mother type figure, so to speak. But all human beings, when they're looking to their leaders, they are looking for subconsciously something that kind of rings and rhymes with their childhood experiences. And so we can really ruin their day or make it a wonderful day depending upon how we act. So I would urge any leader or soon to be leader to think about, when I say something or when I do something, what impact is that going to have on my employees' day? How are they going to, when they get back home and their partner asks them, "Hey, how was your day?" What will they say? And just to think about that. And I think when we respect our employees' emotional well-being, they respect us more for that. They realize that
mm.
and I'm a great believer that culture trumps strategy, as Peter Drucker said. Culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Love that. I love that. And I love that thinking. And it's like both scary in one way when you talk about, the idea of like personal accountability of like, how are you affecting the energy you're putting out there? Right. And at Deep Human X, we talk a lot about the human operating system, right? We have ways of operating as human beings that are always exchanging energy with those around us. And when I hear you talk, I think about a lot of personal accountability, which could be scary, right? Like, oh my God, I don't know if I want to like own every, emotion for every other person. But in the same time, it kind of feels like by taking that point of view, you also are taking some accountability for yourself to maybe be in integrity more, or just be, to just really be more honest with what you're feeling and what you're putting out there, and making sure that you are, feeding your own well, and that you're also taking care of yourself when you're taking care of others. Because otherwise, that personal responsibility can feel like a burden instead of a great opportunity to say, hey, I get to influence, 10,000 people today. Am I going to waste today, or what am I going to do? Right. What is it I'm here to do? Right. So
Right.
it really got me thinking about personal accountability as you were talking.
Yeah, I agree. I think that when you create a good atmosphere with your team, it's tremendously energizing, not just for them, but for you. It's you feel good about yourself. You feel great at the end of the day, not just them.
Yeah, and what do you think that is? Why do you think that some teams, like I have some teams that I feel like we worked harder when I look back throughout my history, that we worked harder than than I ever even thought was possible, yet they became a source of energy for me. So it was like you said, I felt good. I felt as if working this hard was actually energizing me and somehow helping me move
Right.
forward as well. What do you think the difference is to, between teams that are like that are energizing versus teams that are, I've also been on soul sucking teams. What do you
Right.
think the difference
Right.
between the two are?
Well, I think it's sometimes hard to get it right, but I think at the end of the day, it's if if everybody enjoys what they're doing, and that is critical. As you know, there's the old saying, if you enjoy your job, you'll never work a day in your life, you know. But I remember after the last company I sold, I took a little bit of a break and I decided to become or to learn or to try to learn how to be a movie director. So I
Hmm.
took a course in movie directing and it's great fun. I really enjoyed it. But I remember the last short movie we produced, it was a 5 or 6 day exercise. And we were getting up at 8 o'clock in the morning and finishing at 2 o'clock in the morning. Now, all the people working with me, lighting, camera, actors, continuity, everybody in that team were volunteers. They weren't being paid. They were
Wow.
just doing it for the love of the art. Now, I have never worked so hard and had the team work so hard, and yet we enjoyed every single moment. It was just a super intense and enjoyable moment. And I got out of that, you know, if you can somehow make your work, I mean, obviously that's you can't always achieve that, but if you can go in that direction of trying to make work fun, enjoyable, and that's partially an attitude. If people go into work thinking, I'm in here to crack the whip and make things get done, not make people be happy, things will get done. But if you go in and say, I want to make people happy and get things done, maybe things will get done better or faster. And in any case, people will be happier. That's for sure.
Yeah, people will be happy. I mean, and let's be real, we're all beings of energy, right? We want to be happy. That's like what we're here for. But somehow we've doesn't it feel like somehow we've gotten the work, I don't know, the work world backwards, where we're instead of using money to allow us to do the things that bring us joy, we've now replaced work as the me as like money as the destination for why you work. And to me it just feels backwards, like as a human, like it feels like no, we should work for joy and figure out how to make money doing it, because we all want money,
Right.
right? But um what do you think that is? Do you feel what I'm saying there about how it feels like a lot of people are like, no, you should just be happy you have a job. And it's like, well, yeah, but that job's not bringing joy. So is that really worth the amount it's taking
I,
from you, money?
I think a good analogy is to think about when we were on a team, some kind of sports team during, say, high school or middle school. You know, they're not paying us to be on the team. And it is a kind of work, you know, a physical activity or other types of activity, mental, physical. You have to play with the team. You have to get along with the team. There are issues with some of your teammates. You get fights sometimes, you don't. You win some matches, you lose some matches. That's all very similar to our experience at work. The difference between being at work, we get paid on top of things. But
Hmm.
we typically, oftentimes, enjoyed playing sports. Now, why was that? We had a common goal. We were working with teammates towards a common objective. And all of that can be true at work too. So why should we not have the same thing that we had when we were playing, I don't know, soccer, for example, in high school?
Yeah, no, I love that. That's like, it's so funny because it feels so logical. We've somehow, instead of like, right, winning the game or having a goal, we've somehow made it feels to me, anyways, like we've made the corporate workplace about we have to only look at the points. The points are more valuable than actually winning the game. So we've almost lost in some ways um, the ability for critical thinking and higher thinking about looking at more than just the play you're running, like looking at the bigger picture to make sure we are on track to win the game. What do you think? Like, what do you think? How do you think businesses today are like stifling critical thinkers? And what do you think leaders could do to bring that back? To bring back whether it's joy, whether it's larger goals, whether it's teamwork. What do you think that is going on in the business workplace today that might be stifling that creative thinking?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think It's useful when we think about corporations to keep in mind that if you look at the value added chain, some money goes out to pay suppliers. A large portion of money goes out to pay employees. Some money goes out to pay debt holders. And some money goes out to pay shareholders. And then some money goes out to pay the government in the form of taxes, if hopefully if there's a profit. But if you think of all those subdivisions, the amount that goes out to pay the shareholders is not a huge percentage of the overall pie. It's rather small, in fact. So there are, in fact, many stakeholders in an enterprise. There's the clients receiving the service, the suppliers who are, shall we say, partners, junior partners, but they're partners. There's the employees who form the bulk of the costs. Management, also employees, but at a slightly different category. Bondholders, debt holders, shareholders, government. Um, we've somehow convinced ourselves that the only people that matter within that universe are the shareholders, and within them also minority, because unless it's a private enterprise, if it's a publicly held corporation, they're really just passive investors. They buy, they sell, but they're not really running the business. And the management, which is, again, it's a small portion of that pie in numbers. So I think if we have a holistic view of the enterprise as we're all in this together, we all have our part to play, and we're all equally to be respected, I think that's a starting point. Where it
That's
goes from there,
good.
I don't know. But I think if we take a kind of very single dimensional view that no, the only thing that matters is that one small percentage of that whole value added chain, I think that's crazy.
Yeah, no, and I can only concur with you because I came from a Fortune 500 company that I left about a year ago, and that was one of the things that surprised me is that um the people were often thought of as transactional, whereas the shareholders were thought of as invaluable. And to many people, to many of the shareholders, right? Like it was nothing more than passing a passing phase of, oh, did it go up or down this quarter, did it go up or down this day, right? But that there wasn't an emotional connection. So how do you think, so one of the things that when we talk about AI, right, is it's going to bring a lot of innovation, which means that we're probably in order to break out of the thinking that you were just talking about, we're probably going to have some conflict, right, around how do we, in order for innovation to happen, you do have to have some, I'd call productive friction, right? And humans are actually really good at this in our day-to-day lives. It's amazing, but for somehow we've taken that away at work. Of we only, we don't speak of problems. We have professional tone. We have a lot of rules and regulations to try to avoid any type of potential conflict or friction, which so in one way it's like this is what we need to move forward, companies need to move forward, but at the same time that the cultures of avoiding that friction are leaving companies kind of spinning the wheel, right, like running the same playbooks over and over. um, do you have any idea or any tips of human skills you think that how leaders could create healthier environments where friction isn't quite as looked down on, or conflict isn't considered a bad thing? Instead, it's being part of, like, the basketball team you were talking about, or the soccer team, to win and lose. You got any ideas on that?
Yeah, well, that's a tough one because first of all, employees do not want to give bad news going up. You know, now that can be accentuated or not by leadership if leadership shoots the messenger or has a tendency to shoot the
Right.
messenger. If they do, then they'll be even more isolated in a bubble because they really won't know what's going on. Now, in order to get around that, they have all these quantitative dashboards to try to figure out what's going on. But the old management by walking around and just talking to people, whether that's customers or
Yeah.
suppliers or employees, is really rather effective because you transcend that kind of invisible bubble where people are not giving you the bad news. But it's also true, we alluded to this at the beginning when we were talking about giving bad news to employees. And that's also that leaders don't like to do, because it's
Yeah.
kind of admitting, it feels like admitting failure. It's not, but it feels that way. Like if I tell people that this quarter was bad, people are going to be demoralized and maybe they'll think it's my fault. And in any case, I'm just not going to tell them and I'm just going to gloss over it and move on and so on and so forth. Obviously, there's all types. There's other people who will be very brutal and, say, hey,
Yeah.
we had terrible numbers this quarter and we really need to improve, etc. But to your point, I don't know what the answer is. I know what we do in our own company, which is we have as a core value politeness. So disagreements are encouraged, but within the respect and doing so politely. And in the age of uh, remote communication, whether it's email, Slack, WhatsApp, whatever it is, it's so easy to misunderstand somebody because you don't have the context. You don't see their face. You don't hear their tone of voice. You read the thing and say, how dare they say that to me, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And so one way to try to minimize that is to do an extra effort to be extra polite. I spent 5 years in Japan and there, and politeness is really a core element of their culture. And that helps get over some of the rough edges of many social interaction.
That's really interesting because I hear, again, back to personal accountability that you mentioned earlier. I hear that you're saying, right, there it is on leaders to not be lazy and to make sure that they are figuring out how to communicate honestly, as well as employees, right? Like to really embrace the fact that we as human beings in our operating system, we have we're analyzing 40 million bits of information every second and we're aware of 40 of them. So we're only aware of this little bit. So there is something about that human to human contact that just makes you understand more because you have all of your sensors at work when you're not just reading it only in a text or an email, right? Um,
Exactly.
what do you think though, like if we talk about the ideal like future of work and where would be so let's use your company right now, right? If you think about where you want to go in the next 3 to 5 years, like where can you think about, what's a big target you want to hit?
Sure. Well, we're in a particular field that's user experience testing, user experience optimization, user experience research. And we took Peter Drucker's comment that culture eats strategy for breakfast, and we changed it around. We said user experience eats strategy for breakfast. And we really believe it's true that uh, so many companies have been incredibly successful simply because they were passionate and obsessed with making the user experience as perfect as possible. And that's our mission. Um, we're operating in 40 countries right now. We hope to continue being, a global leader in this field. Um, AI, you've mentioned it a few times. That's going to change everything. We're not
Hmm.
sure exactly in what way. Um, and we're keeping a close eye. We've developed some AI capabilities and will continue to do so, but it's anybody's guess how that will change things. In terms of the future of work, uh, I personally believe that our whole system of education and work is based on a middle-aged concept when knowledge was static. Knowledge
Yeah.
did not change generation to generation. And so you would go to school if you were at the level where you could go to school or university or what have you. But if you then went on to work, you went to an apprenticeship training, whatever, then you became, I don't know, a blacksmith. The methods of blacksmithing did not change. All of a
Right.
sudden AI didn't come in and teach you a better way to be a blacksmith. Nowadays, knowledge is tremendously dynamic. And so I think ideally we should start working not when we're 18 or 22 or 25 or whatever. We should start when we're 13 or 14 in small batches,
Mm.
and we should never stop studying. We should go through life where every year is a mixture of studying and work, and the amount of the year that is studying and the amount of the year that is work should change depending upon our age. In order to do that, that's such a systemic change that I have no idea how to get there from here. But I'm convinced that we need to move in that direction. And who
Well,
knows? Maybe with AI we'll be able to. I don't know.
well, and I love what you said because I have been in tech for 25 years. I completely understand the technology piece of how AI works, but I'm very humble to say there is no one person, one company that knows where this is going to go. In fact, part of the reason for Deep Human X is we're doubling down on the human side because it's going to be what we as humans decide we value. That's actually going to be, and not again any one person, but going to actually determine where this thing goes. Right? Are we going to use AI for good? Are we going to use AI for bad? But you did bring up, which I thought was interesting, and you brought up how everybody should have work. And to go back to our joy conversation earlier, a Deep Human X, the reason we have the X on there is it is for experience, but it's also that everybody has their own place filler of what brings them joy, what brings them, keeps them motivated, the thing that is your driving force that you've had since you were probably 3 years old, right? Can I ask you, Alejandro, what your X is? Like, what is it that you think you're most passionate about when you think about stepping into the future and, where the world's going? What is it that really drives you?
Well, it's a tough one to answer, but I love creating things. Whether it's creating companies, which I've done a few times, whether it's creating movies, which I did on that occasion that I told you about, whether it's writing fiction or, there's a nonprofit initiative that I'm thinking about at some point. I love the act of creation, but that's, yeah. And I love it, by the way, when done jointly with a team, with a group. It's just
Mm.
so much more fun than, I wish I could have had one small percentage of the talent that the Beatles had, and to be in that group where that free flowing
Right?
creativity, that's just such a magical and wonderful thing. Uh, I think it's much more fun being part of a group like the Beatles than to be a sole genius like, say, Beethoven. Because I think that's somewhat of a solitary thing. But working together with a team to create magic, or something that aspires to be magical, I think that's the best.
I love that. You're totally inspiring me too, because I agree with you, right? Creativity is a way to reach magic, right? And if even if you don't hit it, like it's that goal that really keeps you driving moving forward. So that is awesome. Um, if I'm going to ask you our final two questions in two sentences or less. What do you think the future of work will look like due to AI?
I ponder that question, as do many other people all the time. What I come back to is classical Greece. Um, when we think about classical Greece, we think about some of the wonderful plays that were invented. In fact, the whole science, if you will, of plays itself, of uh, philosophy, literature, history, so many things that were invented during that period. But one of the things we tend to forget is that that society had a ratio of about 10 slaves for each free person in the entire city of Athens. Now, I'm not a proponent of slavery, but
Hopefully, no one is.
at all. But my point is, this was a society that was liberated from, shall we say, the more mundane chores because of slavery. Now, if you look at AI, it can potentially liberate us from all the mundane chores that currently occupy our time. I mean, how many of us, when we go to work, there is maybe 1% or 10%, hopefully, of our workday that is, creative, that involves working with our teammates and creating those magical moments. But a lot of it is just mundane chores. If AI can liberate us from those things, then, you know, potentially most of our day is spent being much more creative, and maybe we end up like Athens in 5th century BC, an incredibly vibrant and creative civilization.
Right, that shaped so much of, right, humanity of where it is today. That is, I was not expecting you to go there, but that is an absolutely beautiful thought, right?
Sorry,
I love it.
that may
I
be
love it.
somewhat politically incorrect. Again, I just want to make sure that's understood. I'm not a proponent of slavery. I'm just saying
No,
the
but
the
no, a
liberation
lot
from
of us,
mundane chores that occurred.
like a lot of us feel, I've often heard, I've heard our mode of operation today is like equivalent to like Henry Ford, the production line. Right. Where it's like we've asked people to do this stuff. So now you go to work and at least 50%, if you're lucky, it's only 50%, but usually a much more are filled with mundane tasks that are soul sucking, that are like, oh my God, I just don't wish I could do that. But now we actually have machines who can help us. So how can, right? How do we use that to say, okay, if 50% of my time is free, what am I going to use to do better for humanity, right? What am I going to use to change the world I live in? So I love that thinking, because I do feel like we are on a precipice of change that's going to help humanity, but only if we use AI for good, right? Which is a great
Yes.
thing. Get rid of all the tasks that we hate so we have time to think about where do we want to make an impact. Beautiful, beautiful thinking. I love that. And then my last question for you is what are the top 3 skills you feel that people should be working on developing to stay relevant and impactful as this change unfolds in front of us? So what are the human skills?
Um, that's an interesting one. Uh, one of the things that the United States and the UK excels at when compared to, say, societies in mainland Europe or even Asia Pacific is the ability to communicate. In the United States, from a young age, you go to the classroom and it's show and tell, right? So we're
Hmm.
being taught how to communicate. Now, I think that is spot on, a fantastic aspect of American education and culture, as well as UK. Um, because, you know, if you go to university and you learn electrical engineering or you learn many other skill sets, it's quite probable that a majority of what you learn you will not use in the future. It's just, partially because knowledge is dynamic, partially because the nature of your job is different than what, universities, you need to have that kind of understand what that all is. But at the end
Hmm.
of the day, that's not really what you're going to be doing. And what you're going to be doing oftentimes comes down to communicating, whether it's
Hmm.
communicating as a leader, whether it's communicating as a peer, whether it's communicating as an employee, as part of a group, as part of a team. So communication skills, in my view, are always going to be super important. Now, having said that, AI has improved our written communication skills. I see that every day with my employees who before they used to send an email that was like not quite there in terms of how it was structured. And now what they're doing is they're feeding it into ChatGPT and coming back a perfectly well structured and clear to the point communication. So written communication, maybe AI is going to do a lot of that for us. But verbal communication, I think, is going to remain a human activity. So that's one. Creativity, um, that's just, I may be speaking because I like creativity and I like creative work, but I do think that AI will help us as a tool to be more creative, as well as liberating us in terms of mundane tasks and giving us the time to be more creative. Uh, but I think that there will be a premium on creativity
Mm,
because, at least for the moment, until AI gets to be a super intelligence, um, I think is a little bit derivative in its approach. And I think this kind of out of the box, I think it's a great tool for creative minds. It's going to
yeah.
help us, but I do think that human creativity is going to be important. Uh, those are only two out of three. I'm not sure I can give you number three right now,
That is
but
okay. You have shared a wealth of knowledge, very interesting and inspirational points of view. So I really love the conversation. If our audience wants to check you guys out, where should we send them to? What's your website?
so yeah, the website is userlytics.com. User as in, user experience, and lytics as in, like from analytics. We have this saying that, analytics tells you what, userlytics tells you why. That's kind of our tagline. But
I love
yeah, userlytics.com. And yeah, um,
it.
thank you
Awesome.
so
Well,
much
thank you.
for
Yeah, thank you so much for being a guest on the show. Thank you everyone for listening. And we look forward to seeing everyone in the future.
super. Thanks so much, Lord.